Hey guys, Rob here with McDojo Life. In today's McDojoNews, we're going to talk about a Texas fight promoter who was recently sentenced to 15 years in prison for stealing cocaine with the help of corrupt police officers. Let's check out the story. A drug smuggler who stole cocaine from the Gulf Cartel and recruited a network of corrupt law enforcement officers to cover up his thefts was sentenced to 15 years in prison on Tuesday. U.S. District Judge Keith P. Ellison sentenced Damas de Leon Rios, age 46, of Edisonburg, to 15 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. "I believe it was a miscarriage of justice today," said attorney Clay S. Conrad of Houston, who represented de Leon. "It's not as if Damas deserved a civic improvement medal or anything, but he didn't deserve 15 years either." Before his arrest, de Leon led a double life, running several businesses by day and smuggling drugs by night. De Leon owned South Texas Vocational Institute, a nursing academy that partnered with Rio Grande Valley school districts. He owned Valley Motion, a glossy magazine that touted health and beauty tips, and he promoted mixed martial arts fights held by an organization called South Texas Fighting Championships. When he wasn't at work, de Leon doted on his wife and 6 children. He also had a secret. De Leon and a childhood friend named Carlos Oyervidez were smuggling drugs on the side. Oyervidez, who testified during a 2-week trial in July of 2019, said they charged $1,000 per kilogram to transport cocaine from Rio Grande Valley to Houston. Marijuana cost about $100 a pound. They worked together for about 5 years, Oyervidez said, without any problems. But then they get a genius idea. They figure, you know what? We can make more money if we just steal the drugs we're supposed to be transporting and sell it ourselves, Assistant U.S. Attorney Casey Nicole McDonald said, according to a trial transcript. Oyervidez and de Leon knew they couldn't just steal drugs from the Gulf Cartel without consequences. They recruited a network of corrupt law enforcement officers to cover up the thefts. After they received cocaine or marijuana from a supplier, de Leon and his associates would sell most of the shipment for profit. They would keep just enough to create bundles of hay wrapped with a thin layer of marijuana, or bricks of white powdery substances that contained only trace amounts of cocaine. They would plant the fake drugs in abandoned vehicles and pay corrupt law enforcement officers to stage drug busts. After officers seized the low-purity bundles of cocaine or hay wrapped in marijuana, they would provide a police report to the supplier. The paperwork allowed de Leon and Oyervidez to steal drugs without attracting suspicion. Oyervidez started by becoming a confidential informant for the Edinburgh Police Department. He fed tips to Hector Beltran, a canine officer. De Leon and others eventually recruited a network of corrupt law enforcement officers that included Border Patrol agent Daniel Polanco, Border Patrol agent Eduardo Bazan, Police Lieutenant Vincent Salinas, and 2 Houston area police officers. The scheme worked until Edinburgh assigned Beltran to a U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration task force. Based on a tip provided by Oyervidez, agents made 2 major cocaine busts. Lab tests, though, showed the cocaine had been diluted. Agents with Homeland Security Investigations, a division of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, cracked the case after Oyervidez was kidnapped in Reynosa and decided to cooperate. Prosecutors brought charges against 19 people, including 6 law enforcement officers and an informant who double-crossed the FBI. The investigation, which agents called Operation Blue Shame, also resulted in spin-off cases against former La Jolla Police Chief Giovanni Hernandez and Johnny Jacob Deming, a former sheriff's deputy from Louisiana who had been assigned to a DEA task force. With the exception of Deming, who was scheduled to plead guilty in September, the law enforcement officers were either convicted at trial or pleaded guilty. De Leon struck a deal with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to a federal drug trafficking charge in November of 2017. He returned to the federal courthouse in Houston on Tuesday morning for sentencing. The press asked the court to make the hearing accessible by teleconference. The court, however, had problems with the teleconference system on Tuesday morning. After spending more than an hour attempting to fix the system, the court decided to proceed with sentencing, leaving the media and the U.S. Probation Office of McAllen unable to listen. The transcript wasn't available Tuesday afternoon either. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas, which prosecuted the case, summarized the hearing in a news release. At the hearing, the court found de Leon was the leader of the drug trafficking organization and tampered with 3 witnesses during the course of the investigation, according to the news release. Judge Ellison found that firearms were used during the commission of the offense and noted a kidnapping of a U.S. citizen at the hands of members of the Gulf Cartel was part of the case. In an interview after the hearing, Conrad disagreed with how the government described his client. DeMoss was essentially the bookkeeper. Quite frankly, he was the only one who knew how to keep track of all the moving parts. He was not doing, I guess you would call it, field work, Conrad said. He was the bookkeeper on this thing, because he had run a lot of legitimate businesses and he had those skills. Many informants and witnesses in the case had credibility problems, Conrad said, but the government believed anything they said about De Leon. Conrad said a prosecutor even brought up an old allegation that De Leon attempted to obstruct the investigation with black magic. She said that DeMoss had gone to see a witch doctor to give Anibal Alanis' wife cancer, and that he did that in order to get Mr. Alanis off the case, Conrad said, referring to the assistant U.S. attorney Anibal Alanis, and asked the court to credit that as obstruction of justice. Conrad said he found the story ridiculous. I didn't even respond to the witch doctor allegation, Conrad said. I've done so before and said, really? We're doing this in federal court in the United States? Conrad said he was concerned that De Leon received a longer prison sentence than the law enforcement officers. It is a situation where, in my mind, the most culpable people should be the cops, Conrad said, because if they weren't willing to sell out their office, the conspiracies like this would be impossible. That is a hell of a story. Think about it, man. How crazy is that? There was a fight promoter in Texas who goes from being a fight promoter to being this guy who's smuggling drugs over the border, and he's doing so using corrupt police officers' help. That is a story that is ready for a made-for-TV movie if I've ever heard one. I am super curious what you guys have to say about this particular case. I cannot wait to read what you say about this in the comment sections below. As always, I appreciate the consistent support of the page. Keep the martial arts legit.